This masterpiece will rewrite fashion history. Make sure everything is flawless. Alexander Moreau's powerful voice cut through the backstage chaos. His son, Julian, stood beside him, a smug smirk on his face. Of course, father. With 300 million euros from the Japanese, the House of Moreau will be an empire. In a hidden corner, Isabel was hastily adjusting a final model's outfit. Sophie, be careful you don't prick your finger, she called over her shoulder to where her 12-year-old daughter was diligently helping her mend a loose seam. I'm used to it, Mom, Sophie replied softly. Just then, the lead model swept past, draped in the stunning gown that was the soul of the collection. Sophie looked up and froze. The needle slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. Mom, her voice trembled. That dress, the pattern on it. Isabel turned, her expression worried. What is it, honey? Without waiting for her mother to finish, Sophie scrambled for her old backpack and pulled out a worn-out sketchbook. Her small fingers flew through the pages until they landed on a yellowed sheet where a delicate pencil sketch depicted the exact same dress. Below it, a note was written in elegant, faded script. Kyoto in my heart, Eleanor Bennett. Look, Mom. Sophie held out the book, her voice cracking with disbelief. This is Grandma Eleanor's design. Isabel stared, transfixed, at the sketch, then looked up at the large monitor, showing Alexander Moreau presenting the gown to Mr. Watanabe. The color drained from her face. Sophie, put the book away. I'm begging you, she whispered, her voice laced with fear as she quickly tried to pull her daughter's hand down. We can't. You don't understand, the Morios. But Mom, it belongs to Grandma. He stole it, Sophie growled, her eyes welling up with indignation. She couldn't understand why her mother was afraid instead of angry. This was her grandmother's legacy, her heart and soul. Their small argument had attracted unwanted attention. Julian Moreau, Alexander's arrogant son, approached them, followed by his mother, Clarice, whose face was a mask of disdain. What's all the noise in this corner? Julian asked, his voice dripping with condescension. What kind of drama are the seamstress and her daughter putting on now? Isabel flinched and quickly hid the sketchbook behind her back. It's nothing, Master Julian. We're sorry. But Sophie refused to back down. She lifted her chin and looked Julian straight in the eye. Mr. Moreau stole my grandmother's design. Silence fell over their corner of the backstage. Clarice erupted into a sharp, cutting laugh. Shut your mouth. What does a child know? Isabel, haven't you taught your daughter her place, or are you scheming to steal my husband's credit? She moved closer, hissing the words. Someone of your station shouldn't entertain such fantasies. Julian smirked, a malicious glint in his eyes as they scanned Isabel's sewing basket. Feigning carelessness, he bumped her arm, sending the basket tumbling to the floor. Needles, thread, and scraps of fabric scattered everywhere. A piece of pristine white silk, which Isabel had been about to use for a small repair, landed right at his feet. As the entire crew watched, Julian deliberately ground the heel of his expensive leather shoe into the silk, leaving a grimy black scuff mark. Oh, my apologies, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. It's just some cheap fabric, after all. Tears streamed down Isabel's cheeks. She bent down to pick up her things in silent humiliation, but when she glanced at her daughter, she saw something different. The fear in Sophie's eyes was gone, replaced by a flame of determination that had just been ignited by the insult. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring straight ahead toward the stage, where Alexander Moreau was preparing for the show's finale. Her mother's tears of humiliation were the final torch that burned away the last of Sophie's fear. She no longer cared about the consequences, no longer thought about their threats. All she could see was the filthy shoe print on the white silk, the triumphant smile of Alexander Moreau on the monitor, and the sound of applause celebrating a lie. While her mother was still tremblingly collecting the shattered pieces of her dignity, Sophie had made her decision. On stage, The music swelled to a crescendo. The lead model, wearing Grandma Eleanor's dress, did a final turn, the camellia patterns shimmering under the lights. Alexander Moreau stepped out, arms outstretched, to receive the thunderous applause. He stood there, arrogant and proud, the center of the universe. Thank you, everyone," Alexander boomed, his smile radiant. "The icon you see before you is the very essence, the creative soul of the House of Moreau." "That's a lie," a child's voice, clear yet steely, rang out, cutting through Alexander's speech. From a gap in the velvet curtains, Sophie had slipped out. She stood there, small and out of place on the lavish runway, still clutching the old sketchbook. Every camera flash that had been aimed at Alexander now swiveled to her. The music died abruptly. Hundreds of pairs of eyes in the auditorium fixed on the little girl, stunned. The air froze. Alexander was speechless, the smile on his face curdling into an ugly grimace. Backstage, Isabel clapped a hand over her mouth, too horrified to even breathe. Sophie took a deep breath, her voice trembling but full of conviction as it echoed through the silent hall. "He didn't create that dress," she yelled, pointing a finger directly at the model, who stood frozen on the stage. "It was made from my grandmother's sketches, from Eleanor Bennett's designs, from years ago. He's a thief." The moment Sophie's shout ended, the room erupted. A wall of blinding white light from hundreds of cameras erupted, washing over the stage. The deafening clicks of shutters mingled with stunned whispers that quickly swelled into a roar from the press. "Where did this insane girl come from?" Alexander Moreau bellowed, his voice cracking with shock and fury. The perfect smile from a second ago had shattered, revealing a face contorted and red with humiliation. He pointed a trembling finger at Sophie. "Security, get her. This is a conspiracy. Sabotage." Like sharks that had smelled blood, the reporters leaped from their seats, pushing forward and thrusting cameras and microphones into the air. "Moreau, is what the girl said true? What's in that sketchbook? Little girl, who are you? Is she the daughter of a fired employee?" The questions, shouted in a dozen different languages, overlapped into a chaotic wall of sound that cornered Alexander. He was losing control. Two massive bodyguards immediately rushed the stage, their radios crackling to life. They ignored the questions. Their objective was clear. They moved directly towards Sophie, who stood her ground, small but unflinching, clutching her grandmother's legacy like her only shield. Backstage, Isabel collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. "Sophie, no," she sobbed in despair. It felt like her whole world was collapsing, but Sophie didn't back down. Her gaze was locked on Alexander, challenging his lie in the middle of the storm she herself had created. The bodyguards were closing in. One reached out a rough hand to grab her shoulder. Sophie had only seconds. She didn't scream again. Instead of looking at the furiously shouting Alexander, she whipped around to face the front row, her gaze searching for and locking onto Mr. Hiroshi Watanabe. Ignoring the chaos, she took a deep breath, and in the broken but clear Japanese her grandmother had taught her, she spoke. "Watanabe-sama, please, look here." The entire auditorium was stunned. A French child speaking Japanese, Mr. Watanabe, who had been about to stand, froze. His eyes narrowed, his focus now entirely on the little girl. Seeing she had captured his precious attention, Sophie didn't waste a second. She pointed at the pattern on the dress. "That camellia flower," she said, switching to French so everyone could understand, but keeping her eyes fixed on Mr. Watanabe. "In Japan, it is called tsubaki. My grandmother embroidered it blooming out of season as a symbol of hope in the dead of winter." Did Mr. Moreau know that? Alexander was dumbstruck. All he knew was that it was a pretty flower, nothing more. Sophie didn't give him a chance to respond. She pointed to another detail, a tiny, intricate element that no one would notice without looking closely. And there, that tiny knot hidden in the leaves, her voice trembled with emotion. It is not a decorative pattern, it is our family's mark. A symbol only the seamstresses of the Bennett family understand. 3 interlocking loops, representing 3 generations. Eleanor, Isabel, and Sophie. My grandmother, my mother, and me. With that, she quickly flipped the sketchbook to the corresponding page. Under the flashing lights, everyone could clearly see Eleanor's pencil sketch, with scribbled notes beside it, explaining the meaning of each detail. Here, it's all right here. Sophie held the book high. This is my family's story, my grandmother's legacy, not his groundbreaking creation. Her words were the final hammer blow, shattering any remaining doubt. A story that personal, that deep and full of emotion, couldn't be fabricated. Alexander Moreau could steal an image, but he couldn't steal the soul behind it. The proof was undeniable. This was no simple disruption. The reporters went wild, realizing they were witnessing the most explosive plagiarism scandal in the history of Paris Fashion Week. Seeing the panic in his team's eyes and the undisguised glee on the faces of the reporters, Alexander Moreau finally lost all composure. His lie had been laid bare for the entire world to see. "Shut her up," he roared like a wounded animal. "Get her out of here. Get her and her mother out of my sight. Now." Without a moment's hesitation, the 2 massive bodyguards lunged towards Sophie like hawks diving for their prey. The auditorium held its breath, waiting for the inevitable, brutal scene of the poor girl being dragged away. In the wings, Isabel could only squeeze her eyes shut, unable to watch. But just as a bodyguard's hand was about to clamp down on Sophie's shoulder, a voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but it carried an absolute authority that made both colossal men freeze in their tracks. "Arrêtez. Stop." It was Mr. Hiroshi Watanabe. He was on his feet now, his face calm but his eyes as sharp as a blade. Every sound in the auditorium ceased instantly. Alexander Moreau turned, stunned and confused. He couldn't comprehend why his most important investor would intervene. Ignoring Alexander's panicked expression, Mr. Watanabe looked directly at Sophie. There was no judgment in his gaze, only an unusual, intense focus. He spoke in French, his voice slow and deliberate. "Mademoiselle, please, explain." Every eye in the room turned to the little girl. The weight of the world seemed to be pressing down on her small shoulders. Sophie trembled, her lips moved, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes. But then she remembered her grandmother's words. "When you are scared, remember where your heart belongs." Her heart was in Kyoto, with her grandmother's memories. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Sophie gave Mr. Watanabe a formal Japanese bow. Then she looked up, and in the Japanese her grandmother had taught her broken, yet full of sincerity, she began, "Watanabe-sama." A fresh wave of astonishment rippled through the room. "In this book," Sophie continued, her voice shaky but growing stronger, "my grandmother, Eleanor-sama, sketched her memories of Kyoto. This tsubaki flower, she drew it blooming out of season because she said it was the flower she saw in the snow, a symbol of resilient beauty. It's more than just a pattern." She turned to another page, pointing to the small symbols. "And these marks." She was inspired by Kamon, the family crests of Japan. She created a crest for our own family of seamstresses. Every line has a meaning that only we understand. As if connected by an invisible thread, her words wove a private space between the 12-year-old girl and the powerful investor, right in the middle of the chaotic stage. She was no longer trying to prove something to the world. She was telling her grandmother's story to the one person who might truly understand the cultural soul within it. Suddenly, from the wings, a choked sob shattered the silence. Everyone turned. A young woman from Moreau's design team, her face streaked with tears, was shakily stepping out from the shadows. She looked at Sophie, then at Alexander, the conflict and guilt plain in her eyes. "Amélie, get back here, now," Alexander hissed, his voice laced with menace. But it was too late. The camera flashes immediately swiveled to the young woman. She was the new focal point. The little girl. She's telling the truth. Amelie burst into tears, her voice breaking with pent-up anguish. It's all true. The room erupted. If Sophie's words had been a spark, this confession was a powder keg. We found that sketchbook, she continued, ignoring Alexander's murderous glare. It was in a dusty old box of materials from a workshop the company acquired years ago. It was a treasure trove. Amélie looked directly into the forest of cameras, tears streaming down her face. But Mr. Moreau, he forced us. He said that old ideas have no owner and that it would be a waste not to share it with the world. He ordered the entire team to recreate every detail and then put his own name on it to sell to the international market. The confession was out, clear, definitive, and undeniable. It was a death sentence for Alexander Moreau's reputation, read aloud before the entire fashion world. While the auditorium was still reeling from Amélie's confession, Mr. Hiroshi Watanabe paid no attention to the sobbing designer or the crumbling Alexander Moreau. He stepped onto the stage and walked directly towards Sophie, his gaze fixed on the sketchbook in her hands. "Little one," he said, his voice calm but laced with a strange urgency. "May I see the name on the sketchbook, please?" Sophie, still dazed by the turn of events, hesitantly handed the book to him. Mr. Watanabe took it with both hands, with an unusual reverence. His finger gently traced the elegant, faded script, "Kyoto in my heart, Eleanor Bennett." Upon reading the name Eleanor Bennett, the powerful man's eyes went wide. An expression of stunned recognition, nostalgia, and deep emotion washed over his usually composed features. He looked up, first at Sophie, then at Isabel, who was being helped out from the wings. "Eleanor Bennett," he repeated the name, like a whisper from the past. Before the astonished silence of hundreds of reporters, Mr. Watanabe began to speak, his story echoing through the hall. "Many years ago, when my father was just a young man working in a textile workshop in the Gion district of Kyoto, a terrible fire broke out. The flames spread quickly. My father was trapped inside, surrounded by collapsing, burning beams. His voice grew heavy, weighed down by memory. Everyone else had already fled, but one person didn't. A young English seamstress who was there to study silk weaving techniques defied the danger and ran into the blaze. She found my father unconscious from the smoke and dragged him out, just seconds before the roof caved in. Mr. Watanabe looked up at Sophie and her mother, his eyes shining with infinite gratitude. That brave seamstress. Her name was Eleanor Bennett. For decades, my family searched for her to repay the life debt we owed her, but she left Japan shortly after, and we lost all trace of her. He gently handed the sketchbook back to Sophie. I never imagined that today it would be our benefactor's own granddaughter who would once again protect my family's honor by exposing a lie. The historical connection that had just been revealed was the final nail in the coffin of Alexander Moreau's career. The atmosphere in the room was no longer one of lurid curiosity over a scandal, but of a solemn silence in the face of a story of gratitude and honor. Mr. Hiroshi Watanabe turned to face Alexander, who now looked worse than a condemned criminal. Mr. Watanabe's usual powerful demeanor was now ice-cold. "Mr. Moreau," he said, his voice booming and clear, loud enough for every microphone to capture. "Our contract was to be built on trust, creativity, and honor. Tonight, you have proven that you possess none of those things." He glanced at the €300 million contract lying on the front row table. "The Watanabe Corporation will never do business with a thief and a man of no honor." Then, he turned to his assistant and issued a short, crisp command in Japanese, but its meaning was universally understood. The assistant immediately walked over, picked up the contract, and, in front of hundreds of cameras, tore it in two. The sound of ripping paper was sharp and final, like the reading of a verdict. That was the moment the Moreau empire fell. Instantly, The press descended like a swarm of bees. Headlines were already forming in their minds. Paris's fashion king is a fraud. Moreau. The €300 million empire collapses in one night. The truth about Eleanor Bennet, the forgotten heroine. Phones buzzed incessantly as the news went viral at the speed of light. The Moreau Corporation's stock, if it even survived until morning, would undoubtedly plummet. Backstage, the family drama began to unfold. "This is your fault. All of it. Because of your stupidity," Clarice shrieked, shedding any last shred of her public image. She pointed a finger right in the face of her husband, who was still frozen on stage. "I told you not to be so greedy." "She's right," Julian chimed in, his eyes no longer filled with admiration but with pure contempt. "You ruined everything. You ruined my future." Alexander said nothing. He just stood there amidst the flashing cameras that felt like accusations, listening as his empire and his family turned to ash around him. The price of having no honor, in the end, was losing everything. While the Moreau family tore each other apart in bitterness, Mr. Hiroshi Watanabe ignored them completely. He looked right through them, as if they were ghosts that no longer existed. Instead, he turned back to face the forest of cameras and microphones aimed at him and raised a single hand. A near-absolute silence fell instantly. The reporters held their breath, knowing the story wasn't over yet. Mr. Watanabe didn't look at them. His gaze was fixed on Isabel and Sophie, who were still huddled together, overwhelmed by the storm they had just weathered. Tonight, Mr. Watanabe's voice boomed, amplified by dozens of microphones. "We have witnessed the price of dishonor, but more importantly, we have seen the power of truth and courage. Courage and integrity are clearly the Bennet family legacy." He gave a deep, formal bow to Isabel and Sophie, a gesture of profound respect that stunned everyone present. "To express my family's gratitude to Mrs. Eleanor Bennet, and to honor the talent and integrity of her daughter and granddaughter," he continued, "I would like to make a public offer. I formally invite Mrs. Isabel and young Sophie to Tokyo." Isabel looked up, her eyes wide with astonishment. "We will collaborate on a new design project," Mr. Watanabe declared. "A collection that will truly honor Eleanor Bennet's legacy and bring her Kyoto-inspired designs to the world with the honor they deserve." The offer was stunning enough, but he wasn't finished. He turned to Sophie, his eyes now warm and affectionate. "And as for you, Sophie-chan," he said, "for your extraordinary courage, the Watanabe Corporation pledges to fund your entire education at any prestigious fashion school in the world you choose until you complete your studies." It was the promise of a future Sophie had never even dared to dream of. Isabel burst into tears, but this time they were tears of happiness and infinite gratitude. She could only whisper two words: "Thank you. Thank you." Sophie stood silently, still clutching her grandmother's book. She had not only won justice for her grandmother, she had reclaimed a glorious past her family never knew it had. And right before her eyes, a brilliant future had just opened up. A few days later, the glamorous but treacherous world of Paris was far behind. The sky outside the airplane window was a deep, endless blue. Below, the clouds stretched out like a fluffy white blanket, completely separating Sophie from the world she had just left. She was no longer the little seamstress hiding in a backstage corner, but a special passenger on a flight to a new beginning. Sophie stopped looking outside. She glanced down, her gaze softening as she looked at the treasure in her lap, her grandmother's old sketchbook. Her small hand brushed over the worn cover, feeling the creases of time. This book had once been the cause of humiliation, but now it was her passport to the future. It was a testament to an undeniable truth that true creativity is timeless, and the courage to defend one's honor will, in the end, be rewarded. A serene smile blossomed on Sophie's lips. The plane flew ever forward, piercing through the clouds, heading toward the rising Sunday. It was carrying her to Tokyo, to a brilliant future. A future woven not from expensive silks and brocades, but from the golden threads of honor and kindness.